Welcome to Let's Talk Business Phoenix, where we dive into the topics shaping our community and our economy. I'm your host, Todd Sanders, and today we're excited to introduce a new series, Election Insider, Voices of the Vote. In this series, we're going to explore the pivotal role of elections in our local and national business landscapes, from interviews with key political figures to insights on how voting impacts business policy. Our goal is to provide you with information you need to make informed decisions and understand the broader implications of your vote. Join us as we bring you voices from across the political spectrum, offer behind-the-scenes looks at elections processes, and discuss how the outcomes of these elections could impact the business climate here in the greater Phoenix region.
Let's Talk Business Phoenix was produced in partnership with Ideas Collide, an agency offering a full suite of custom marketing solutions for your brand's unique challenges. Make a connection at ideascollide.com.
Well, welcome back to the podcast. We are honored today to have the Secretary of State for the state of Arizona, Adrian joining us. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for
Happy to be here.
Coming to hang out with us for a little while.
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, we always like to start with sort of getting to know you outside of your bio. So maybe tell us a little bit about you, but also something interesting.
Well, I was born and raised down in Nogales. My family's been in the desert, Sonoran Desert, for a very, very long time. In fact, I kind of laugh a little bit when people are like, oh, we've got 3 or 4 generations in Arizona. That's cute. I have an ancestor who's heard Mass given by Father Kino in 1695. Okay.
That's legitimate.
So the Fontes has been around for a while. And went to Arizona State. I'm a Sun Devil. Went to the University of Denver for law school and spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. I enlisted to try to see the world, right? And I ended up getting stationed in Yuma, Arizona, which was
the world comes to you.
Different. Yeah, the world came to us. But one thing that people might not know about me was that I was the lead male vocalist in the mariachi at Arizona State.
All right.
When I was an undergrad.
I love that.
So if this was tequila,
yes,
a little while bit, yeah, I would probably start humming a few tunes.
So favorite song then? We have to know now. I mean,
well, my favorite song is actually it's called Rata de Dos Patas, and it's by Paquita la del Barrio. She's this really, really powerful singer who's very well known in Mexico, but not really outside of Mexico. And the song is it's called The Two-Legged Rat, as you could probably tell. And it's this whole series of delicious insults strung together. She's basically singing to this guy who did her wrong. And it's just really, it's beautiful. Which, I don't know, it's just, you got to have fun with it.
Yep.
You got to have fun. Well, there's a few love songs I like too, but that one's a lot of fun.
After the podcast, go take a look at that. Go listen. Rata de Dos Patas. Take a look and let us know what you think. So we do hear about people being here for 1 or 2 generations. Obviously, your family's longer. Yeah, we keep hearing it seems to be getting hotter and hotter. In your experience, is that what you're seeing? Is it hotter longer?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I taught swimming lessons in Nogales, and you could actually almost set your clock by the monsoon in the summertime, and we'd get the kids out of the pool. Storm would come through, a little bit of lightning here and there. It wasn't maybe 12 minutes later, back in the water, here we go. Just the rain would come through every day for that period of time. It's very different now. It's unpredictable. The extremes are a little more extreme. And so we're going to have to really start paying attention to how we live and how we deal with all of this if we're going to continue to grow.
You bet. Well, let's get into your role. I think people sort of intuitively know what the Secretary of State does, but maybe a little primer on the work of the Secretary of State, which is pretty broad.
Well, yeah. So we've got 3 major divisions in the Secretary's office. The most fun one for me is libraries, archives, and public records. That's where we house an enormous amount of information about Arizona. I'm a big history buff, and we just got some projects moving where we're digitizing a lot of old newspapers from a lot of the communities in Arizona. So you see some really, really interesting stories about folks and communities that kind of tie the whole story together. It's really nice. The second division is our business services division, which is kind of near and dear to my heart because it's got a lot of ways. It's sort of the grease on the skids, right? Government has to do certain things to make a lot of other stuff work, and we're happy to improve that. I'm sure we'll talk about some of that stuff. The one that is the most active now and has been is our election division. And what we have there are a whole series of sub parts, right? We do campaign finance, The elections procedures manual is worked on by, our lawyers and our election director. We do some candidate services and other things. And so we also kind of up staff and down staff when it comes to petition signature time and things like this. So that's a really busy part of our work as well.
Well, it's such a broad portfolio. I'm assuming, thinking back to, for instance, former Governor Mofford, who was Secretary of State, I'm assuming that at that time, a much different platform and much different mission than what you're seeing today.
Well, and here's the thing. It is different, but I'm an optimist, right? So there's a lot of folks who are saying a lot of stuff that's not true, demonstrably false in many cases. But what we do see is this silver lining to this cloud, and that is that over the last several years, we've had this, what you could call a slow-rolling civics lesson. People are starting to understand the process more that they once took for granted. They're starting to ask questions about, well, how does this work? How does that work? And we're very happy to help people understand these processes so they can understand better how this democracy works. And that's always a good thing. So, there is some good that comes with all the challenges, but some of the challenges remain.
You bet. A lot of good opportunity. So prior to this role, county recorder, but since 22 in this role, what's been sort of some of the biggest challenges and opportunities? I think obviously you've talked about one of those.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was coming into an institution that had been for generations underfunded, underappreciated, understaffed. And so really bringing it up to where it needed to be. It's really hard to know what the mission is supposed to be, understand what the statutory duties are, and then not be able to perform because there's no resources. And so I think one of the biggest challenges we've had is convincing the legislature and the other folks that are involved in the budgeting process, we've got to fund this thing. We've got, people are demanding perfection out there, and we can get pretty well up there, but we can't do a lot of the stuff that you want us to do unless you fund it. Campaign finance, for example. Arizonans passed Prop 211. They obviously want to see where the money's coming from and where it's going to. I can't do it if the core architecture of my IT systems are 12 years old. I just can't. And so I want to give the services that people demand, but without the resources, and in business services as well, right? We want this little corner of government to run at the speed of business. I can't do it. You want a Lamborghini, but you're giving me a Yugo. Let's get in the middle somewhere.
You just dated yourself, by the way.
Yeah, okay, a little bit. But let's get moving on making sure that we've got the resources to provide the services that people want, so that we can, like I said earlier, continue to grow and prosper.
So relative to other states, and I know you're talking to your colleagues around the country, how well positioned are we?
As far as
funding and making sure that you're able to get the job done.
Oh, we're not anywhere close to the top. I'd say at best we're in the bottom third, maybe the bottom fifth.
So work to be done.
There's a lot of work to be done, and it's not like I just want to spend a bunch of money. I want to provide the services that Arizona deserves, not just in business services, not just in library and archives, not just in elections, but as the Department of State. And without the resources, we just can't deliver. And so I'm hoping to continue to beat the drum on that and make sure that we can get Arizona what it deserves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So pivoting a little bit to the recorder side, talk to us a little bit about the differences in those two roles. Or both, obviously, there is an election function for both, but maybe sort of the differences and similarities.
Yeah, really simple difference is imagine for a moment that the world of elections is a professional sports league. The Secretary of State in Arizona is the commissioner, sets out the rules, certifies the officials, makes sure that the teams have the resources they need to get out there and play. And it's the counties that do the actual work. They're the ones engaged in the game. They pick the polling places, the poll workers. They're the ones who do all of that training at that level. They do the balloting, the ballots and the ballot tabulation. They're responsible for voter registration. We make sure to certify the elections officials. We make sure to certify their equipment. We do logic and accuracy testing before and after each election to make sure that that there's nothing wrong or unusual about all of the equipment that actually does the tabulation activities. And so we have this great relationship with all 15 counties. And, I'm the first Secretary of State since the early 80s that actually has run elections at the county level. So when we came in January of 2023, my administration is full of folks from the county. So we knew which questions to ask, We knew what folks needed. We had built those relationships already over years of work. And I think we've done really well. So I think our preparation for 24 is about as good as it could be.
And so those relationships with the county recorders, does that still continue today?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not just the county recorders. It's the boards of supervisors. It's the elections directors. A lot of other folks are engaged in the process. So in Arizona, each county board of supervisors is actually the election board, right? In other places, they're appointed. We elect them. They're the library board too. They have different roles. But the county recorder is the registrar of voters in each of the counties. So they own all of the data. Now, Maricopa and Pima County have their own core voter registration systems. We hold the one for the rest of the counties, all 13. So we've got a 13 one-in-one system here in Arizona. Again, it's an illustration of that bottom-up nature, right? The counties run our elections. We make sure everything's good to go, regulate. And sometimes we get into a little tussle with some folks who have different opinions of how to do it. But we try to follow the law, we try to enforce the law, and we try to get the resources that are necessary for them to do their jobs.
And certainly, we've learned that one of the important functions of the supervisors is they also certify the elections. Correct?
Absolutely, it's a ministerial role. It's basically a statutory mandate that happen. And the best follow-up is: are we worried about any of that happening in 2024? And my answer is not really. And here's why. In 2022, there was one county where a couple of the supervisors refused to certify the election, and they were indicted for interfering with the secretary's ability to do her job. That was when Governor Hobbs was the secretary. And so there's a little bit of a sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of folks who might want to take that path. So we're discouraging that because the Attorney General is busy enough. She doesn't need to be indicting any more supervisors.
Right, absolutely. Well, we just had sort of the first test. We just had the primaries.
Yep.
Give us the rundown. What were the highs? What were the lows? What would you want to improve?
Well, here's the interesting thing. So we had the presidential preference election in March. And within a week of that, we actually had jurisdictional elections in a couple of our municipalities. Then in May, we had some other jurisdictional elections. And then at the end of July, we had our primary. So we've already had 4 elections in Arizona this year. Folks kind of don't realize that sometimes if they're out of those districts.
Yep.
The systems run relatively smoothly. We've had a couple of hiccups like we always have in every election. Some little thing happens. It's a human endeavor. We're never going to get it perfect. We've never said we're going to get any of it perfect in Arizona, but we do really darn well. Arizona's voters have more options on how they can vote than just about any other citizens in the rest of the United States of America. By the use of some of our technology, they can not only do it in more ways, but in more places than just about anybody in the United States for those counties that do vote centers and allow voting anywhere in the county. So we really do well by our voters. And I think generally speaking, voters are pretty satisfied with the way we do work. At least that's what the numbers tell us when we do our surveys. So I trust the numbers a lot more than I trust the pundits.
Right. So looking back at now, you're to your point, 4 elections during that primary season, anything that stuck out in terms of things that really went well or things that you'd like to improve?
Well, both. Things that went well were our ability to communicate across the board. I think our media partners did a great job helping us talk about deadlines. Our law enforcement partners did a great job helping us sort of make sure that everything went smoothly and they were available. Nothing necessitated their responses, which was great. So we were really happy about that. And again, some of the things that didn't go as well, we weren't able to do some of the other public outreach that I would have liked to do to try to get participation up in those primary elections. And that's, again, because of budgeting, right? Public education is so incredibly important. When you want to understand what more Arizonans think, you got to get more Arizonans voting. That's the one way you can say this is the direction that the state wants to go in. Not you necessarily or me, but all of us together. That community decision-making is what democracy is all about. It's what the United States of America is all about. And so a broader view of what more people think is always going to help inform that better. And so I'd love to see more effort put into outreach into all of our communities so we can get, that truer understanding of Arizona's intentions.
What was the general turnout? I mean, as an average?
Well, for the primary election, I want to say it was something less than, it was about 32% in that range. Primary elections usually are about that. It was a little on the lower side. For the general election, though, we're expecting pretty high turnout. There's a lot of excitement.
Really?
There's a lot of excitement for the fall. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and let's head in that direction now.
Was that the segue you needed?
That's a great segue. Good, thank you. And we were talking about this a little bit before we started, that this ballot could be a little long.
Oh, it's going to be terribly long. So 9 of our 15 counties will have 2 cards to their ballot. Now, in election speak, that's 2 physical pages. And in Maricopa County, which is where 60-something% of our voters are, the average ballot has 78 elections on it. Now, in the elections world, we look at each election as separate. So election for president, election for Senate, election. So questions, right? 78 is a lot. So what we're hoping people will do is vote early, right? Get your ballot in the mail or go vote in person early, because the length of the ballot itself could be problematic come election day. Now, I don't want to discourage anybody from voting anywhere under any circumstances, but because you've got a lot of options, Arizona, and because you've got a really, really long ballot, we're encouraging folks, figure out a way to vote early, make a plan either by mail or in person. And if you're going in person, you're going to have to bring the appropriate ID with you. You can go to arizona.vote for those information.
Okay, so bring your ID, passport. Not going to do it?
Passport's not going to do it because it doesn't have your physical address on it. A utility bill and a passport works. And again, those lists can be found pretty easily at arizona.vote.
Okay. And to your point, there are some options before Election Day. One is voting centers that are going to be open, correct?
Yep.
Let's talk about mail-in ballot. There's been a lot of talk about whether or not those are secure, whether or not those are something you can rely on. Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a delicious irony in those rumors, innuendos, and conspiracy theories in that in 2020, I got a postcard from one of the presidential candidates who had been decrying the security of voting by mail, but the postcard was to sign me up for voting by mail, and it had his picture on it. So, look, we'll just get to brass tacks on this. It was Republicans in Arizona who created the system of balloting by mail. No excuse absentee voting is what we call it in the election administration world. Helen Purcell, my predecessor in the recorder's office, worked for a lot of years to improve that system and make it the great system that it is now. Much credit to her and her staff, a lot of whom I inherited when she left, and we kept them on board. They're national experts in this field. They run an amazing show down there now under recorder Stephen Richer. And these processes, honestly, have been adopted by a lot of different jurisdictions, not just in Arizona, but nationally, because they're pretty well recognized. So when you look at the checks and balances and you look at the way we administer our elections by mail here in Arizona, the conspiracy theories kind of go out the window pretty quick.
So going back to that benchmark that I talked about earlier about, the rest of the country, in terms of our process, our system for mail-in ballots, where do you rank us with the rest of the country?
We're near the top. Right near the top.
Because
we have,
why?
Well, we've got some bits and pieces that all work together. And here's the interesting thing. When we're talking about elections, you often hear criticism of one bit, but those conversations will ignore some of the other checks and balances that are related to that. So here's really the way it works. First, you got to be registered to vote. And that means that the county recorder has already checked to make sure that you're at an address that's supposed to be the address. And so you're on that particular list, right? Then you got to have asked for that ballot to come to you. They will not just send it out.
Does it just appear?
And then particularly in general elections. Now, jurisdictional elections are different, but general elections, that's how it works. Then when the ballot comes out to you, it's going to come to you. There's a barcode on the ballot, and it's marked as election mail. That means the post office treats it a little differently than first-class mail. It does not get forwarded. Election mail will not get forwarded.
Return to sender.
It's going to go right back to sender. That's important. Also, the barcode that is on there tracks tracks directly back to the county recorder's office. You can see where that ballot is in the process, and that's where our ballot tracking system that we put together in Maricopa County, then Pima County when I was down there, and now statewide, is great because you can get notifications when your ballot gets mailed to you. You can also check your with USPS. They have a service that shows you every day what mail is coming into your post office, into your mailbox, I should say. So then once you're done with that, on the way back, again, that's going to get tracked with the barcode on it. Then we get it for signature verification. And those folks that do the signature verification, I think they're actually better than some of the folks that do it in law enforcement agencies. And here's why. They not only get trained by the same trainers that take care of training the FBI, but they do a lot of it. Every candidate petition, every initiative petition, every ballot that's come through, these folks have years and years doing multiple thousands of signatures. They can tell pretty darn quickly whether there's something wrong with these signatures. And there are 3 layers of human checks on each of these signatures. So that signature verification system is pretty solid. Then it goes, once it's signature verified, good to go, then it'll go to a bipartisan board that gets a big stack of them. And the physical way that they separate the envelope from the ballot guarantees anonymity, because what they'll do is they'll remove the envelope and the ballot from one another without unfolding the ballot. Then they'll count how many ballots they've got, count how many envelopes they've got, catalog those, and then they'll open up the ballots to make sure that they're not torn, that they're not going to have coffee stains and wrinkled up so they can go through. Then they send that off to tabulation. It's a great system and it's very secure. And now we have that ballot tracking part of it, which increases the accountability. So if you want, you could sign up. You get text or emails 60 days beforehand. You get a text or email when it gets mailed to you. You get one when it gets back to them, and then you get another one when it's been signature verified and sent for tabulation. So you can actually track your ballot through the system passively. They'll just automatically, it'll come to you when that barcode passes through those different steps in the process. So it is safe, it is secure. It's actually one of the best ways to do it because let's say, for example, you mail it back and you don't get that text or that email for like a week or 2 weeks, and you voted early, right? Because we're all going to vote early. You can call up and say, hey, I want a replacement ballot, and you can go down, vote a replacement ballot. They'll cancel that other one. It'll never make it to signature verification because it'll be canceled on the barcode on the outside. So we've got all these catches and checks and balances in the system that make it work really, really well. I've got a lot of confidence in that system.
Well, and it's I feel good knowing sort of all these checks and balances. And I've been in this a long time, and I didn't know to the extent that these ballots are checked. So what about sort of this? People that are dead are getting ballots, things like that. Speak to that a little bit.
Oh yeah, that'll happen. Garbage in, garbage out. We've got systems that we try to clean, we try to maintain a lot, but unfortunately, again, this is a human endeavor, and sometimes these bits of information will get through the system. Interestingly, it is a de minimis percentage that usually doesn't have that much of an impact. But moreover, throughout those checks and balances, you get someone who's passed away who gets a ballot. There's still going to be a signature verification.
Right. If I go in and fill it out and sign it, they're going to catch it on that.
They're going to catch it on that side, and or in some of the other spaces that we operate. So, do these things happen occasionally? Yes. Is it a real problem for our system? No. But we could always improve.
Sure. Right? Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, let's get into the other part of that. Obviously, to your point, a lot of elections or questions on the ballot, so lines will probably be long.
I hope not. I hope people vote early and avoid election day.
I'm probably going to do that. I love going to vote, but I probably will. But assuming that, so thinking about returns, we're going to start to see results. Maybe speak to that a little bit. Obviously, there's always that first tranche right at 7 o'clock, is it?
It's 8 p.m.
8 p.m.
Just after 8
We'll see that first tranche, but then it's gonna take some time, I'm assuming.
Well, and it's going to take a little bit longer because the legislature has added yet another layer of, I think, unnecessary, but they think it's another catch on counting the physical ballots at the polling place and then inventorying them again when they get to the warehouse.
So for the same number at the polling place as well as,
and these are the mail-in ballots. And so to me, this is because of the checks and balances we have in the system. I think it's unnecessary and it will cause more delay, which nobody wants, but that's what they asked for, so that's what they're going to get. So let me tell you whose ballot gets announced when.
Okay.
Right. So that 8 o'clock bucket that you're talking about, right? That's all of the people who voted early before probably Sunday or Monday that got tabulated before Sunday or Monday. So if you got it mailed in early, there's a very high likelihood that you're going to be in that 8 p.m. Set of numbers. And the more people that do that, the higher percentage, the easier it is to call the races, right? Then as the evening goes on, the ballots on election day that were tabulated on site. Now, these are not the early ballots that were handed in.
They were dropped in. Right.
These are the folks who went and checked in, got a physical ballot, and then went through the tabulators. We've got to get the data from those tabulators. Then what happens is all of the folks who dropped off their ballot by mail, all of those ballots have to go through the exact same process that your ballot went through, even though you mailed it back 2 weeks before Election Day. It's got to go get scanned. It's got to go get signature verified. Then it has to come back to the warehouse, get open, go through the early boards, right, which is a Republican and a Democrat or different parties who are opening these and separating them, do all those checks and balances. So turning in your ballot on Election Day, if it's an early ballot, that's what delays the tabulation.
Okay.
Or I should say that's what delays the reporting. We will have official results 10 to 13 days out. Anything that you hear before that is unofficial and could change. So I always tell people, just wait, right? It's not going to change the world. The number you get at the official one is the number you get at the official one. Interestingly, though, and on that note, what I'm hoping that we will see is if there are challenges to the election, I'm hoping they happen after the canvass, because you can't challenge an election that hasn't been certified because there's no election.
Right, there's
yet.
nothing there.
There's nothing there to fight over. So that's sort of some of the things that people don't think about too much sometimes. But
So if you see something that an election, a huge margin, it's probably what's going to stay. But if they're narrow margins, don't assume anything.
Never assume anything. I mean, I've got, in 2020, I was up by 100,000 votes on election night. We felt pretty good, but then we looked to see how many ballots were out there, and we're like, whoa. and Stephen Richard, he squeezed me out. But that's how Arizona is. And actually, that's how we've always been.
So be patient.
Patience is a virtue.
So I was at a national U.S. Chamber conference, and one of the things that people kept asking me, they were asking about the races here, and I think that there's a general perception that we tend to be ticket splitters here. Which is interesting, right? Because people, I think, see us one way, but I think we're a lot less monolithic than that. Is that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, all you got to do is look at, I think the best example of that would have been 2018. Governor Ducey and Senator Sinema came out on top in that one, and that was a lot of people really were kind of wondering about that one. But look, we are independent in spirit and in nature, and if you look at the makeup of the precincts, where a lot of those numbers split in the precinct themselves, in Maricopa County specifically, because that's where I was, I didn't really look at a lot of the rest of the state. It was right around the 101 loop, right? So you're not out in the exurbs. You're kind of in the suburbs-ish, and there's a lot of reasons to go both ways on the same ballot, and that's what ended up happening in 2018. And we've seen it a lot since. If you look at my race, for example, in 2022, our estimate is we had about 103,000 Kerry Lake, Adrien Fontes voters. And the way that we're looking at that is, I won by 120,000, and the governor won by 17,000. So just basic math will tell you there's about 100,000 in there, and that just makes sense that Arizona does that, and we've seen it historically, and so it's not unusual. So those of us have really looked at the numbers, don't see any surprises when we see, a Democrat, a Republican, Yeah. It's just the way Arizona is.
Absolutely. To your point, independent.
Very much
independent in terms of the way we vote.
Very much so.
So the last thing I'll ask you about, as it relates to all elections, the rules for margins and recounts were changed by the state legislature. Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that was foolish, and it was poorly informed. We had rules that had served Arizona and served Arizonans very, very well for a very long time, and then based on a lot of conspiracy theories and innuendo, and not looking at statistics or math or numbers at all, because the legislative record is very clear. This was based on rumors and innuendo. They'd reduced the margin. necessary from 0.2% to 0.5%. And that reduction, especially when you have close races, is going to cost Arizona a lot of money. And the problem in the presidential race, because it's a unique race with very specific post-election timelines, is we run up against ECRA, which is the Electoral College, Electoral College Reform Act, I think is what it was. And there's a very, very narrow possibility, although we've worked real hard to mitigate that, that we could run up against that deadline in a way that's very uncomfortable because of this reduction of the threshold. In a lot of other races, it's going to cost us a bunch of money as well. And nobody thought about that. Nobody talked about that when it was sponsored by Michelle Ugenti-Rita back in the day. It doesn't make any sense from a mathematical perspective, from a data science perspective, from a statistical perspective. Frankly, it doesn't make any sense from a political perspective either, because again, it's going to cost Arizona a lot of money. And if there's anything we know about Arizonans, they don't like spending tax dollars on things that are unnecessary. And so the number of races that are actually going to be impacted are de minimis because our systems are pretty darn good. But the amount of money that it's going to cost just to placate this nonsensical conspiracy theory culture that we're into now it's kind of silly.
So more to come.
Sadly, yeah, there will be more recounts, and it's going to cost us a lot more money unnecessarily. Yeah.
Okay. Well, looking towards the next session, any thoughts from you in terms of election-related legislation you like considered or not considered?
That's all going to depend on the makeup of the legislature. The Democrats find themselves in a one-seat minority in both chambers. If they manage to flip one or both houses and give the governor a ruling majority there, the dynamic will shift significantly. That notwithstanding, my office is working on two major pieces of legislation right now. One of them is a technical fix bill that goes through and looks at a lot of the sort of the things that need to be kind of tweaked around. I'll give you an example. Years ago, we had a rule when I was the Maricopa County recorder. We had a rule about tying ballots together with red string. Okay, but it was a rule from the punch card ballot days.
Oh, back in the day.
Which is 25, 30 years past. We could not comply with the law because there were no holes in the ballots.
Back when we had Yugos.
Right? So when we got into office at the recorder's office, I was like, let's see if we can work with the counties across the state and try to fix some of these things. So there's still some technical stuff that needs to be looked at carefully, I think, and we're going to do a bill on that side. And then there's some other reform things that are kind of bigger, dreamier things that I'd love to see. But we'll base our proposals on the makeup of the legislature, because that'll tell us what Arizonans want.
Well, certainly on the technical corrections, I applaud you for that. It's not sexy. No one gets on TV for that, but these are really important changes to our and everywhere. All statute in Arizona has to be updated every once in a while, correct?
Yeah.
So I applaud you for doing that.
Thank you.
It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. So
yeah, absolutely. There's actually one other division in the office that I didn't mention that always gets left out. It's our rules guys. So I've got a division in the Secretary of State's office that makes rules on how the state should make rules.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You want to explain that?
Yeah. So you've got a set of rule-making processes. Those processes are the rules on rules, and that's what these guys take care of.
So Department of Environmental Quality is going to promulgate rules based on statute.
There are ways that they can and ways that they cannot make those rules. Those rules on making rules, we take care of those.
Okay, that is a very little known fact.
Super obscure, a little nook. They've got this tiny little office.
Good.
But you know what? Some of the hardest working people,
they'd have to be.
Yeah.
Well, there is another area where you're engaged in, and I'm assuming it's probably growing in nature given what's happening with TSMC and a lot of these companies that are coming in from overseas. But there's an international component as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been very engaged with international partners who are looking to the enormous opportunities for growth here in Arizona, not just with TSMC and Intel, but all the peripheral businesses that are possible there. We're champing at the bit for these opportunities. We had some folks in from Argentina because there's a particular region, a province in Argentina that has a lot of manufacturing going on there. Everything they build has semiconductors in it. And guess what? They want to buy them from the United States. They don't want to buy them from China or Taiwan. So the opportunities that we're trying to engage in and build, I just had dinner and a meeting with the new Consul General from the United Kingdom late last week. He's a great guy. Got to know each other a little bit, and we're starting to look at ways that we can tie in the UK to Arizona. We've got those dailies that go back and forth to London. We're thinking about maybe expanding or asking the city to work on that with us. So there's a lot of opportunities across the world to engage with Arizona, particularly because of the CHIPS Act and the investment that TSMC has made as well. So we're excited about engaging in that so that we can continue to expand opportunities for Arizona.
Oh, appreciate that work. That's incredibly important, especially with some of our top allies.
Here's the fun thing, right? Particularly for your audience, like I'm a Democrat, sure. I like my warm and fuzzy stuff over here, but I can't do that unless I've got a solid economy where we've got a lot of opportunities for growth, right? And then we can take care of the warm and fuzzy stuff too. So it's a symbiotic relationship, I think, a feel-good space for people to have their families and have great quality lives at the same time as growing opportunity and prosperity for people. Those things can work very well together, but you got to have both.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
The production side of the economy matters, and thank you for recognizing that.
Sure.
Before we wrap up, I would like to get your thoughts on something that we're going to have new here. From statehood till today, we've never had a lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
But we're about to have one. What is that? How is that going to change government and maybe your role?
Well, it's a sigh of relief for me.
Okay.
Well, it depoliticizes the Secretary of State's office because people look to me and they're like, "Oh, you're a heartbeat away from the governor's office," and I'm like, "Whoa, she's fine," What it does is it allows. Well, look, first of all, the governor's job is way too big for one person in this state. Right. Other states have a lot of different things in a lot of different offices. For example, in Colorado, the Secretary of State runs all of the motor vehicle division, all vehicle registries, all that stuff. That's under the Department of Transportation, which is under the governor, right? Water, highways, health, all of these things are concentrated in Arizona under one executive, which might seem efficient, but things get lost. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have some of the problems that we have. If you add a lieutenant governor in there, right? So you've got another set of eyes and ears at the highest executive level who you can, kind of spread some of the wealth on the work with. It'll do two things. Number one, I think it'll help manage stuff a little bit better because you'll have somebody who can really roll up their sleeves and get hands-on while the other person is taking care of, some of the other governor's stuff, which is a lot. Two, for me, it pulls the secretary a little bit away from the political fray, which is really important for this office. The Secretary of State, I've tried to treat it as nonpartisan as possible because of the business services aspect, because of the library and archives, and particularly because of elections. And so while I am an elected partisan, I try to make sure the office is nonpartisan as possible. And I think that'll help a little bit by sort of putting somebody else in the middle of that line of succession. So, I didn't agree with it at first, but that's what the voters want, so that's what the voters are going to get. Right?
Absolutely.
Right? We decide things through the democratic process, and I don't have to like it, but that's the rules.
Well, and it is interesting if you look back in our history, just in the last 20 years, how many secretaries of state became governor?
Yeah.
There's been a lot. Interesting sort of freeway between those two.
We've had a ton.
Yeah.
And also, it's funny because we had an attorney general become governor when Bruce Babbitt ascended because there was a death in the secretary's office, and Governor Castro went to be ambassador to Argentina, I think so. It was, or something. So that succession has happened quite a bit in our recent history. And so it's an interesting thing to have watched and to be kind of personally engaged in sort of that space. But it'll be nice to have that buffer so that we can just do the work.
Yep. Big change is coming.
Yeah, but honestly, I don't think it's going to be that big of a change. We're one of 3 states in the union that has that sort of a setup. So as far as everybody else is concerned, we're kind of coming into the fold.
All right. Well, excellent. Well, thank you for spending so much time with us today, and truly for all the work that you're doing, especially on the election side right now. Clearly, the business side always matters, but the election side, the world's watching. Yeah. Literally, the world's watching, and Arizona in particular is I think a place where people are watching. So thank you for that work. Before you go, we're going to do a quick lightning round with you.
Okay.
Since we're talking elections, what was your first election you voted in? Maybe thinking about president.
My first election that I voted in was in it would have been 1988 if I voted.
That would have been Bush and
That would have been Bush and Dukakis.
Caucus. Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't vote.
I don't know if I did. I was a freshman at ASU at the
Okay.
time, so I can't say that I was in the voting headspace at that point. I was thinking I had other priorities as an 18-year-old kid from Nogales in Tempe.
I can only imagine.
So I can't. Well, I mean, we could check the voting records.
Well, we could go check and see if they had
I'm not one of those persons who's going to say, "Oh, I voted in every election that I'm eligible." That would be nonsense.
Maybe if they had a polling station at the Sun Devil House, you might have voted.
You remember the
All
Devil
right,
House?
of course, absolutely. That was my first election too. Okay, first job. What was your first job?
Ooh, my first actual job. Well, there was one job working in a grocery store when I was a sophomore in high school the summer after, and that's because I had had an accident. I ran into a lady's car when I was late to a basketball game, and I had to pay my dad back. And so I got a job at a grocery store, bagging groceries and sweeping floors and doing all that stuff. But also that summer, I was a swim instructor at Pete Draculich's pool. He used to be the head basketball coach in Nogales High School many, many, many years ago. So I was his last head swim instructor. A few years later, he ended up retiring.
So swim instructor, not driving instructor. Obviously, that was your talents were in swimming.
Something like that.
What'd you learn from those jobs that you think about today?
You got to show up.
Yeah.
You got to show up. You got to be there, right? You got to show up no matter where. It's 85% of the job is showing up and being present and paying attention to what's going on around you, right? That's gonna take you so far, and it has for me, and the times when I'm distracted or I'm not actually there, that's when things go a little cattywampus.
Kudos to Dad for making you get a job to pay off that.
Yeah, well, it was Dad and Mom. They doubled up on me.
There you go.
Yeah.
You had no chance.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously you're well traveled and you do deal in the international space. Favorite country that you visited?
Outside of the United States?
Well, yeah, of course.
Because this country, there's a lot to see here.
There is a lot.
Favorite country that I've visited? I haven't seen a
You can
ton
do a
of
city
all
too.
of this country. Look, I loved Athens. Mm-hmm. I didn't make it to any of the rest of Greece. That was a lot of fun. But you know what? Mexico City. It's like Taipei, which is great. They have those boulevards with trees and all that sort of stuff like that. But there is so much in Mexico City. It's such an enormous place. And it just feels familiar.
And they have mariachis.
And they have a lot of mariachis. And they have lucha libre.
They do. You know, one of the things that I loved, we were on a trip down there years ago, I think when it was Mayor Stanton, now Congressman. There's one of their large parks, almost like their Central Park, and there is two statues, one of MLK and one of Lincoln facing each other.
Yeah.
In Mexico City.
Yeah.
Which is the coolest thing.
Yeah, well, there's a statue of George Washington outside of the, what is the name of that museum in Trafalgar Square? In London.
In London.
Yeah, they've got a statue of Julius Caesar on one side of the big museum, the National Museum there, and then the other side they've got a statue of George Washington in London.
Well, I mean,
both of them,
you gotta love it.
Were not kind to the British. So I just think, I thought I like statues a lot. Now that you mentioned that.
Well, as our airport director would tell you, we have a direct flight to London. So if you want to go check it out, head over to Trafalgar Square.
Go to Trafalgar Square, and there's a big museum. I think it faces the Thames, although there's other stuff in between. And then there's George Washington, I think, is on the right-hand side as you face it, and Julius Caesar's on the left-hand side.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, what a great way to end our conversation, our time together. Thank you again for being here, and we'll hopefully get together with you for a recap after all is said and done.
I'll be very happy to do that.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Appreciate
it.
Thank you so much. You bet.
Thanks for watching this episode of Let's Talk Business Phoenix. Please take a moment to tap the follow or subscribe button for more great podcast episodes to help your business thrive.